Palm Sunday is a curious day in the life of the church. It is upbeat, but we know that the story ends in darkness. It is a curious, awkward story in the life of Jesus, in our chronology of his life. It is a celebration before a story that we know includes betrayal, denial, and death. Palm Sunday remembers, memorializes, if you will, a ride into Jerusalem that we know leads to traumatic events. Jesus is creating a spectacle in this story. Now, in all of our stories of Jesus, how often did he create a spectacle intentionally? Think about it. No, Mom, it's not my time to start doing miracles yet. I don't want to do it. Yes, you were healed, but don't tell anybody. Yes, you all discovered who I am, but don't say anything yet. Jesus was always taking a step back. He would heal and teach and then step away to pray and spend time alone. He would step up to care and then step back out of the spotlight. But in this story, he is creating a spectacle. Jesus is stepping forward in a public way, evoking symbolism from the prophets who came generations before, specifically Zechariah, with all of the leaders abuzz about what to do with Jesus, with the tension in Jerusalem mounting, with Pharisees watching his every step, curious what to do about Jesus. With all of the mounting tension, this is the time he chooses to make a spectacle. Jesus welcomes the crowd. For the first time, he is welcoming the crowd around him, not finding his way away from it. He is welcoming the moment, a moment that seems extremely well thought out. Think about his direction to the disciples. You're going to go into town. You're going to see this donkey or this colt tied up. You're going to start to take it. They're going to ask you, why do you need it? You're going to say the master needs it. It's like there's a screenplay for this before it's ever happened. Everything in Jesus' ministry has been organic. It's happened in time and season. He's responded to the world around him and then stepped away. And now here he is in this strange story, not just stepping into the crowd, into the crucible. He's stepping in very scripted and intentional. Very scripted and intentional. Disciples, go get a donkey, and then we're going to Jerusalem. And the disciples had to be thinking, what? Because they knew these words from Zechariah. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you, triumphant and victorious, humbly riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off. And he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the end of the earth. As for you also, because of the blood covenant of my covenant with you, I will set your captives free from the waterless pit. The disciples knew the prophecies. They knew the prophets in the law. They had been raised on it. So when Jesus says, go get a donkey, we're going to Jerusalem, they all go, uh-oh. Something's happening here. Something is different. Jesus is suddenly on a script he's not been on before. One they've tried to push him onto, but he's not gone with before. In the name of a king, long anticipated. In the name of a king to bring peace instead of war. A king to have dominion over all the world. In the name of a king to let all those who are oppressed go free. In the name of a king coming riding humbly on a donkey. Jesus enters Jerusalem right on script. We sometimes refer to this journey as a parade, but it was more like a march. Poor people and disciples following Jesus, crowds gathering in as their hopes of what might happen increase. The oppressed gathering hopes of freedom as they see others join in the march. Civilian victims of war finally hoping for peace. Some refer to this journey as a celebration, but it had to feel more like a protest march. It had to feel more like a protest march, especially to some. To those leaders who were scared of losing power, to the leaders afraid of change, afraid of a shift in the status quo, to the leaders who benefited from war and oppression. No, this had to feel less like a holiday parade and more like Gandhi's march to the sea. This had to feel a lot less like the children running with Rocky Balboa up the steps in Philadelphia, and a lot more like Selma. This was frightening for many. In Jesus, some saw the prophetic vision for the poor and the needy. And where some saw hope, others were afraid. They saw danger, maybe even their own doom. And yes, this march, this justice march, like all those that we've seen come after it, ends with bloodshed. Not immediately, not in the moment, but Jesus had already barged in peace. He had already struck them with a wave of hope. This couldn't be allowed to continue. It could not be allowed to continue. They tried to end it right there. They tried to end it in the moment. Rabbi, tell these people to be silent. They tried to end it, capturing him later in the secluded garden, taking him away in private. But Jesus had already pushed too hard. He had already pushed too far. The conflict had been stirred. The die had been cast. People continued to protest in the streets. People continued to politic behind the scenes till the manipulations had taken place. The voice had won, and Jesus is convicted and sentenced to death. Yes, this march, this justice march, like those that came after it, ended in bloodshed. But why? Why? That's the question we ask ourselves still today. It's the question that haunts us and should critique us today. Why? Jesus came as one who would bring peace, but some preferred violence. Jesus came as one who would lift up the weak, but others preferred control. Jesus came as one who would unite, but others chose division. Why did Jesus have to die? Because we would rather live with injustice than do the hard work of change? Because we would rather stay broken than do the hard work of healing? A.J. Levine, a Jewish scholar who's an expert on the New Testament, brings a Jewish lens to our stories, and I love some of her words on Holy Week, the journey from Palm Sunday to Easter. She says this: the triumphal entry cannot be separated from the cross, and the cross cannot be separated from the call to justice. And that call cannot be separated from risk, personal, professional, permanent risk. She goes on to say, Jesus is about to give up his life, which requires determining what a life is worth. Jesus is about to give up his life as he rides in on Palm Sunday, which requires determining what a life is worth. She says, and that means we all have to determine what our lives are worth. What is worth dying for? What is worth living for? What are our values and how have we lived up to them? That's why this story still haunts us, still critiques us. We see in this story what Jesus saw was worth dying for. Not the atonement theories and the personal selfish salvation stuff that often gets lifted up, but the oppression of people who now could be set free. The preaching of peace in the midst of war. Jesus dies for what he lived for. Not what we've projected, not what we have transactionally exchanged. On this day, what is Jesus choosing to die for? To proclaim peace, to proclaim freedom to those who are oppressed, to proclaim unity from all corners of the earth. I love the image in Zechariah, from where the river runs until it meets the sea. The river back in Genesis 1, swelling up from that garden at the beginning of creation, from creation until we meet our Lord. A unity of God's people, a beloved community that Jesus said, yes, that's worth it. We know what he felt was worth dying for. For us, what is worth living for? We say Jesus died so we could live. So if he died for these things, are we willing to live for them? Are we willing to live for them? Where some are more scared of change than committed to fight injustice, we must be a voice of hope, determined to live for that change. Where some are more comfortable in pain than the courage to heal can overwhelm, we must be the voice of hope, the presence of Christ's light. These questions continue to challenge us as community and individuals. As a community, where are we more scared of change than we are committed to justice? Where do you see it in our world today? Where are we more scared of change than we are committed to justice? Our brothers and sisters on the border can tell us. Our brothers and sisters whose identity does not conform to the norm can tell us where we're more scared to change than we are to stay with injustice. Those who reap the benefit from unjust policies, from broken systems, will tell you where we are more scared of change than committed to fight injustice. And as individuals, where are we more comfortable in pain than willing to change and heal? How often have we sat in our own hurt, scared of what could be, more so than the pain we sat in? The pain becomes something familiar, something known, something we tell ourselves we've deserved. So rather than make the change, we sit in it. We allow God to punish us for something that God has never uttered. For those in the crowd, those following Jesus, a time had come. A time had come till they were away from the moment and sucked back into the chance of crucifying him. The time had come. They were ready to celebrate the hope that was there until the hope got hard. And the work of change required them also to determine what they would die for or what they would live for. The time had come till they were back in the struggle and had to consider the consequences of change. For those watching, those asking Jesus for silence, they struggled to even understand the question before them. They struggled to see themselves as the problem. The story falls into the chronology of Jesus' life, but in this way it acts more like a parable for us. It invites us into the role of those who struggled to see themselves as the problem, those calling for silence. Are we willing to work for change? Are we willing to reflect and be honest about our role in injustice? Are we willing to do the work for change? Are we willing to let something of our life die? Something of our control, our power, our privilege. Are we willing to let that die so that someone else can live in freedom? Are we willing to reflect and be honest with ourselves? Have we missed hearing anyone in their cries, asking for help, crying for our attention, or those who might challenge our decisions? Have we tried to silence anyone? Have we cried out, "Rabbi, tell them to be quiet"? Those of you still complaining, be quiet. Those I disagree with, be quiet. Those who would critique me, be quiet. Are we willing to reflect and be honest with ourselves? Have we silenced our own pain, pretended everything was okay, made a decision to hide our hurt, let our pain control us? Have we silenced our own conscience, dehumanized others to fit our bias, sold out on facts to fit our narrative, chosen revenge over justice? We know that some things are unescapable. Some things will happen no matter what, no matter how we try to control them. Hurt people without help will hurt people. Loving ourselves and others will increase love. And regardless of what else happens, God will work for good. God will work for good. With us, for us, through us, often despite us. God will still work for good. God will work for good. If these people were silent, the stones would shout out. If the victims are quiet, the advocates will shout out. If the advocates are quiet, the community will cry out. If the community is silent, prophetic voices will rise up and speak for God and God's people. We've seen it throughout history. We know it to be true. God continues to work for good even despite us, often even through us. Eventually pain will be seen and it will be heard. Hurts will be made known when they happen or when we see them passed on to others. We must have the courage to work with God. We must be willing to live for that dream, to live for God's kingdom to come and God's dream to become a reality. If we don't, someone else will. If we don't, we will become the oppressor or the offender. If we don't, someone else will. And if we silence them, the very creation will shout out the good works of God. When Esther was trying to decide if she should stand up in her moment, in her time, Mordecai tells her, if you don't do it, someone else will, because God's going to win. But shouldn't we be part of the story? Shouldn't it be us called at a time such as this? He knew what we celebrate today. God will work for good one way or another. Don't we want to live for that? Our story today is the first step of Jesus moving towards the cross. It is a memorial march. It is a reenactment. The poems we brought forth this morning, a memorial to that moment of Jesus proclaiming that God's going to work for good no matter what happens in the week to come. And God's vision is worth dying for. For us, will it be